I still remember the sound of someone pounding on my apartment door just after 7 in the morning. Not knocking, pounding. The kind of pounding that instantly tells you something is terribly wrong. At first, I thought maybe one of my neighbors was in trouble. My apartment building wasn't exactly quiet, and every now and then someone would accidentally lock themselves out or need help carrying furniture upstairs. But then I heard a voice. "Police! Open the door!" For a second, I honestly thought they had the wrong apartment. I wasn't the kind of person who got into trouble. I worked, I went to college, I paid my bills, and I spent most evenings studying or watching movies. My biggest concern at the time was passing my exams and figuring out what I wanted to do with my life after graduation. So when I opened the door and saw 2 officers standing there, I smiled nervously. There must be some mistake. There wasn't. Within 2 minutes, my hands were behind my back. Within 5 minutes, I was sitting in the back of a police car while my neighbors peeked through their curtains. I kept asking the same question. What is this about? Neither officer answered me. The only thing one of them finally said was, "You can explain everything downtown." I wish that had been the worst part. It wasn't. Because I hadn't committed the crime they were accusing me of. The person who had accused me was my own younger sister. Before I tell you what happened, I'd like to ask you something. If someone in your own family falsely accused you of a felony just to save themselves, could you ever forgive them? Let me know in the comments as you listen. I'm genuinely curious where most people draw that line. And if you enjoy true family stories like this one, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel, and there are many more unbelievable stories coming. Now, let's go back a couple of days. I was 22 years old. My sister had just turned 18. If you looked at us from the outside, you'd probably think we came from a pretty fortunate family. Our dad owned several successful businesses. Our mom had always had a good career of her own. We lived in a nice neighborhood. Money wasn't something we constantly worried about. People assumed that meant our family was happy. They couldn't have been more wrong. My sister had always been my mother's favorite. Not in one of those subtle ways parents deny. I mean painfully obvious. She could do almost anything and somehow walk away without consequences. If she broke something, someone else must have done it. If she lied, there had to be a misunderstanding. If she got into trouble, someone was jealous of her. Most of the time, that someone was me. Thankfully, my dad wasn't blind. He loved both of us, but he refused to pretend my sister was perfect. Whenever she lied, he called her out. Whenever she manipulated people, he confronted her. Unfortunately, one reasonable parent can't always balance another who refuses to see reality. My mother defended my sister every single time. Looking back now, I think that's when everything started. My sister slowly learned a dangerous lesson. She wasn't responsible for her actions. Someone else would always clean up the mess. Usually my parents. Sometimes me. As kids, she wasn't always like that. We actually got along surprisingly well. We built blanket forts in the living room. We raced our bikes around the neighborhood. We played video games until Dad told us to go outside. I have pictures from those years where we're both laughing so hard our eyes are closed. Sometimes I look at those photos and wonder, at what point did I stop being her brother and become someone she was willing to sacrifice? I honestly don't know. But somewhere during high school, everything changed. She became obsessed with popularity. Every decision revolved around impressing friends, being the center of attention, getting what she wanted. And because Mom almost never told her no, she rarely heard the word from anyone. I learned something else during those years. If my sister wanted something badly enough, she didn't really care who got hurt. At first, it was little things. She'd borrow my clothes without asking. She'd forget to replace things she'd broken. She'd tell tiny lies that somehow always ended with me getting blamed. Nothing life-changing, just enough to slowly destroy trust. Dad noticed. Mom refused to. Family dinners often ended with arguments. Dad would tell my sister she needed to grow up. Mom would immediately defend her. Then they'd fight. Meanwhile, my sister would sit there quietly, knowing exactly what she'd done. Sometimes, I swear she enjoyed watching everyone argue over her. When I moved into my apartment for college, I actually thought things would get better. Less time together, less conflict, more peace. Instead, distance only gave my sister more freedom to make terrible decisions. And one phone call changed everything. It happened while our parents were away on vacation. They'd gone skiing for the week. Before leaving, Dad gave my sister one very simple instruction: no parties. Honestly, it shouldn't have needed to be said. An 18-year-old alone in a large house, anyone could predict what would happen next. Apparently, Dad could too. Unfortunately, being right didn't stop it from happening. I found out about the party by accident. Not from my sister, not from my parents, from social media. A friend sent me a screenshot with one simple message: "Isn't this your parents' house?" I opened it. There she was, smiling for the camera with a giant caption announcing the biggest party of the month. Everyone was invited. There would be music, food, and unlimited drinks. My stomach immediately dropped. Every single person she invited was around our age. Most of them weren't even 21 yet. Some were still in high school. Before I had time to process any of it, my phone started ringing. My sister. I already knew why she was calling. "Hello?" She didn't even bother saying hi. "I need you to do me a favor." "What kind of favor?" "I need alcohol." I closed my eyes. "No." She laughed as if I'd misunderstood. "I haven't even finished." "You don't need to. You can legally buy it." "I'm 22. You have an ID." "I don't." "Go buy it for me." "No." There was a long silence. Then she changed her tone. "Oh, come on, stop acting like Grandpa." "I'm serious." "So am I." "It'll only take you 20 minutes. "No." "I'll pay you back." "No." "I'll even introduce you to one of my friends." "No." "She's been asking about you." "I don't care." Another silence. Then, "You've always been jealous of me." I almost laughed. "Jealous? You hate that people actually like me." "That's not why I'm saying no." "Then why?" "Because you're asking me to help you break the law." She groaned dramatically. "You sound exactly like Dad." I'll take that as a compliment. That only made her angrier. "You always ruin everything." "No, you did. You promised everyone there'd be alcohol before you even asked me." "I thought you'd say yes." "Why?" "Because you're my brother." I took a deep breath. "And that's exactly why I'm saying no." She wasn't hearing any of it. "You know what?" "What?" "If you don't help me, you're going to regret it." That sentence should have scared me. Instead, I rolled my eyes. I honestly thought she was just throwing another tantrum. Looking back, I wish I had taken those words much more seriously, because she wasn't bluffing, not even a little. She screamed something else into the phone. I never even caught the words. I'd already pulled the phone away from my ear. When she finally stopped yelling, I quietly said, "I'm done with this conversation." Then I hung up. A few seconds later, she called again. I declined it. She called again. Declined. Again. Again. Eventually, I switched my phone to silent and tossed it onto the couch. I remember standing in my apartment thinking, this whole thing will blow over tomorrow. I couldn't have been more wrong. That night, I made dinner, finished an assignment for class, watched half a movie, and went to bed before midnight. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, my parents' house had turned into complete chaos. The music was so loud neighbors could hear it from down the street. Cars lined both sides of the road. Teenagers spilled into the backyard holding bottles they were far too young to legally drink. Someone uploaded videos to social media. Someone else called the police. To this day, I don't know who made that call. Maybe it was an angry neighbor, maybe another parent, maybe someone at the party got scared. Whoever it was, they probably prevented something much worse from happening, because several people later admitted they had planned to drive home after drinking. When the first police cars arrived, panic spread through the house. Kids started running. Some tried climbing fences. Others hid bottles under couches. A few actually attempted to leave in their cars before officers blocked the exits. My sister, instead of accepting responsibility, started looking for someone else to blame. And somehow, she chose me. I was asleep when she gave the officers my name. According to her, I had bought every bottle. I had delivered the alcohol. I had organized the entire thing. None of it was true. But she told the story with so much confidence that the officers believed her. I had no idea any of this was happening. I was lying in bed, completely unaware that by sunrise, my life was about to change forever. The next thing I remember was waking up to someone pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I rolled over, looked at my clock, and squinted. 7:08 a.m. Who in the world shows up that early? Then I heard it again, much louder this time. "Police, open the door!" My heart instantly started racing. Police? Why? I threw on a t-shirt and walked to the door, still half asleep. When I opened it, 2 uniformed officers were standing there. Neither one looked happy. "Are you?" one of them said my full name. "Yes." "We need you to come with us." I frowned. "What happened?" "You're under arrest." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because I honestly thought they were joking. "I'm sorry, what?" One officer stepped forward. "You are under arrest for supplying alcohol to minors." For a second, my brain simply stopped working. What? Before I could even finish my sentence, they turned me around. Cold steel snapped around my wrists. Click. I've never forgotten that sound. Handcuffs don't just lock your hands. They lock your thoughts, your confidence, your sense of safety. The hallway suddenly felt incredibly quiet. Apartment doors slowly started opening. People peeked outside. Mrs. Wilson from across the hall, the college student downstairs, the older couple who always walked their dog every morning. Every single one of them watched me being escorted outside. Some looked confused. Others looked disappointed. No one knew I was innocent, and neither did I know who had accused me. Not yet. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights reflected off every parked car. One officer opened the back door. I hesitated. "There has to be some mistake. You can explain that downtown." That was all he said. The ride to the station felt endless. Nobody spoke. I kept replaying the previous day in my head. Class, work, dinner, homework, Netflix, sleep. What had I done? Nothing made sense. When we finally arrived, they took my fingerprints, my photograph. Everything felt surreal. It was like watching someone else's life unfold. Eventually, they sat me in a small interview room. A detective walked in carrying a folder. He looked at me for a few seconds before speaking. "So, your sister says you supplied all the alcohol." I stared at him. "My sister?" He nodded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "My sister told you that?" "She says you bought everything." "No." "She says you delivered it." "No." "She says you organized the party." "No!" I leaned forward. "I wasn't even there." He watched my face carefully. "Can you prove that?" That question caught me off guard. Could I? Then I remembered. "I got off work around 5. He wrote something down. "I drove straight home." "Anyone see you?" "My apartment has parking lot cameras." He looked up. "Cameras?" "Yes." "I parked my car." "I never left." That finally got his attention. I continued talking. "My sister called me yesterday." "What about?" "She wanted me to buy alcohol." "And?" I refused. "Did anyone hear this conversation?" "No." "But she kept calling afterward." I handed him my phone. "You can check my call history." He scrolled through it. 6 missed calls, then 8, then several text messages. His expression changed slightly. "What else?" I thought for another moment. "Look at her social media." "What do you mean?" "She announced the party before she even called me. If she already promised alcohol, then she planned this before I ever said no." The detective stood up. Without saying another word, He walked out of the room carrying my phone. For the first time that morning, I felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone was finally listening. Unfortunately, not everyone believed me. About an hour later, my parents arrived at the station. Dad looked exhausted. Mom looked furious. The second she saw me, she didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what happened. She looked straight into my eyes and said, "How could you do this to your sister?" Those words hurt more than the handcuffs ever did, because in that exact moment, I realized something. She had already decided I was guilty. She hadn't asked for my side. She hadn't questioned the story. She hadn't even considered that her daughter might be lying. She believed her immediately. Dad, on the other hand, walked straight over to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, then quietly asked, "Tell me exactly what happened." And for the first time that horrible morning, someone actually wanted to hear the truth. Dad listened without interrupting, not once. I told him everything. The phone call, her asking me to buy alcohol, my refusal, the screaming, the repeated calls afterward, the screenshot of her party announcement. When I finished, he didn't immediately say anything. Instead, he looked at one of the detectives. "Can I see my son's phone?" The detective handed it over. Dad scrolled through the call history, then through the text messages. Finally, he looked back at me. "I believe you." It was only 4 words, but after the morning I'd had, they meant everything. Mom folded her arms. "She's just scared." Dad turned toward her. "Who?" "Our daughter. Our son is sitting in handcuffs." "But no." His voice was calm, calmer than I'd ever heard it. "If what he's saying is true, she lied to the police." Mom looked away. "I just can't imagine she'd do something like that." Dad answered quietly, "I can." The room fell silent. One of the detectives cleared his throat. "We're already looking into both versions." Dad nodded. "Good." Then he looked back at me. "What time did you leave work?" "A little after 5. "What route did you take?" "The usual one." "And your apartment cameras recorded your car?" "They should have." Dad smiled slightly. "Then let's go prove it." I'd forgotten something important about my father. Running several businesses had taught him to solve problems logically. He didn't argue with emotions. He gathered evidence. Within the next few hours, he was making phone calls non-stop. He contacted my apartment manager. He requested security footage. He called my workplace. He spoke with my supervisor. He even contacted an attorney before noon. Meanwhile, the investigation was beginning to fall apart. The apartment parking cameras showed my car arriving shortly after work. It never left again that evening, not once. Then investigators reviewed traffic cameras near my workplace. They matched. The timestamps lined up perfectly. I drove home, nothing more. Then came another problem for my sister's story. According to her, I had gone out and bought a large amount of alcohol. Except there wasn't a single transaction on my debit card, not one. No liquor store, no grocery store, nothing. The detectives asked if I'd paid cash. I laughed. I was a college student. I barely carried $20. Dad's attorney suggested checking nearby liquor stores anyway. Security footage from several stores showed dozens of customers that day. I wasn't one of them. Every hour that passed, the evidence kept pointing in exactly the same direction, toward my innocence and toward my sister. Then investigators searched my apartment. They found 3 cans of cheap beer in my refrigerator. That was it. No liquor, no empty bottles, no cases of beer, nothing that could have supplied a party with dozens of teenagers. The detective who had questioned me earlier walked back into the interview room. This time, his expression was completely different. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. "We should have asked more questions before bringing you in." I appreciated him saying it, but it didn't erase what had happened. The handcuffs, the ride through town, the neighbors watching, the fingerprinting, the mugshot. Those memories weren't going anywhere. Then came the question I'd been waiting for all day. "So, who actually supplied the alcohol?" The detective sighed. "We believe your sister broke into your father's liquor cabinet." I slowly closed my eyes. Of course. Dad had a collection of expensive bottles he rarely touched. Some had been gifts, others he'd collected over the years. My sister hadn't bought anything. She'd stolen it. Then, when everything fell apart, she pointed straight at me. Not because she believed I'd protect her, because she believed everyone else would believe her. And for a while, they did. Later that afternoon, I was finally released. Walking out of that station should have felt like freedom. Instead, I just felt exhausted. Dad drove me home. Neither of us spoke much. About halfway there, he finally broke the silence. You know, what? I've defended your sister a lot over the years. I looked at him. But this, he shook his head. I never imagined she'd go this far. I stared out the window. I don't think she's sorry. No, he sighed. I don't think she is either. When we pulled into my apartment complex, he didn't start the car again after parking. Instead, he turned toward me. There are going to be consequences. You mean for her? Yes. And for your mother. I frowned. What do you mean? Dad looked older than he had that morning. Your mother still thinks we should protect your sister. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything? He nodded slowly. She says one mistake shouldn't ruin her future. I let out a bitter laugh. My future almost got ruined. I know. And what did she say about that? Dad didn't answer immediately. Finally, he spoke so quietly I almost missed it. She said your record could probably recover. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Recover? She was willing to let me become a convicted felon so her favorite child wouldn't have to. That wasn't denial anymore. That was a choice, and I had no idea. Things were about to get even worse. The next afternoon, I was sitting on my couch trying to convince myself that the nightmare was finally over. My phone buzzed. It was my dad. Hey, your mother is on her way to your apartment. I frowned. Why? There was a pause. I don't know exactly, but I have a feeling she's going to ask you for something. What? His voice became unusually serious. Don't agree to anything until we talk. That immediately put me on edge. 20 minutes later, someone knocked on my door. This time, it wasn't the police. It was Mom. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red from crying. For just a moment, I thought maybe she'd come to apologize. Maybe she'd finally realized what had happened. Maybe she'd hug me, tell me she was sorry for doubting me. Instead, the first words out of her mouth were, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked into the apartment and looked around without saying anything. Finally, she sat down on my couch. I stayed standing. What did you want to talk about? She took a deep breath. I need you to help your sister. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I already did. No. I mean, now. I stared at her. What are you talking about? She folded her hands together. The prosecutor is considering felony charges. I know. If she gets convicted, it could ruin her whole future. I nodded slowly. Yes, it could. She looked relieved that I understood. So? I need you to tell the police the alcohol was yours. For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. I'm sorry? She looked directly into my eyes. If you say you brought it, they'll reduce the charges against her. I actually laughed, not because anything was funny, because my brain simply refused to accept what she'd just asked. You want me to confess to a crime I didn't commit? It would only be temporary. Temporary? We'll figure everything out later. I shook my head. No. She immediately leaned forward. Please. No. She's your sister. And I'm your son. Silence. Then she whispered, You don't understand. No. I think I finally do. She stood up. You've always been jealous of her. I stared at her in disbelief. Jealous? Yes. You've never wanted to help her. I couldn't stop myself. I laughed again. I almost went to jail yesterday. And somehow I'm still the bad guy? She started crying, real tears, but they weren't for me. They're going to destroy her life. I spoke as calmly as I could. Mom, She tried to destroy mine. She didn't mean, stop, she froze. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She looked the police in the eyes and blamed me. She knew exactly what she was doing. Mom covered her face. You don't know how scared she was. I couldn't believe this conversation. I was handcuffed. I spent the night in a jail cell. My neighbors watched me get arrested. I was fingerprinted. And you're worried about how scared she was? For the first time, she looked away. I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to her. I was wrong. She slowly stood up. Then, to my absolute shock, she dropped to her knees. My own mother, on her knees, begging me, please, I'll do anything. I'll pay you back. We'll make this right later. You just have to save your sister. I took a step backward. I honestly didn't know what to say. She reached for my arm. I gently pulled away. No. She looked up at me. Please. No. If you love me, no. If you ever loved your sister, no. Every answer was exactly the same. No. Her face changed. The tears stopped almost instantly. Instead, pure anger. She stood up so fast the coffee table shook. So that's it? Yes. You'd rather see your own sister become a felon? I'd rather an innocent man not become one. You selfish... She grabbed a picture frame from my bookshelf and threw it across the room. It exploded against the wall. Then another. A small lamp crashed onto the floor. You've always hated her. I haven't. You've been waiting for this. No. She pointed a shaking finger at me. I should have... She stopped herself, then shouted words I'll never forget. I should have never had you. The apartment suddenly felt completely silent. She looked shocked she'd actually said it. So was I. Without another word, she stormed toward the door. As she left, she slammed it so hard one of my kitchen cabinets rattled. I stood there for several minutes, completely frozen. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I just couldn't understand how any mother could ask one child to sacrifice his future for another. Finally, I picked up my phone. There was only one person I wanted to call. Dad. He answered after the first ring. How did it go? I swallowed hard. You were right. There was a long pause. What happened? I told him everything, every single word. I could hear his breathing getting heavier with each sentence. When I repeated what Mom had asked me to do, he didn't interrupt. When I told him she'd gotten on her knees, he still didn't interrupt. But when I repeated her final sentence, I should have never had you, he finally spoke. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard before. Stay where you are. What? I'm coming over. Dad, no. You've done enough. This is between your mother and me now. I had absolutely no idea that phone call was about to change our family forever. Dad arrived less than 30 minutes later. I'd never seen him drive that fast. He stepped into my apartment, looked around at the broken picture frame, the shattered lamp, and the glass still scattered across the floor. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. I could see it in his face. He quietly picked up the broken family photo lying face down on the carpet. The glass had cracked right across the middle, separating my mother from me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. He carefully set the picture on the kitchen counter. Then he looked at me. Are you all right? It was such a simple question, but after everything that had happened, it nearly broke me. I nodded. I think so. He walked over and hugged me. Dad wasn't the emotional type. Growing up, hugs from him were rare. That one lasted almost a full minute. I'm sorry. Those were the first words he said. I'm so sorry I didn't stop this years ago. I pulled back. This isn't your fault, he sighed. No, it is. I kept believing your mother would eventually realize what she was doing. He looked around the apartment again. I was wrong. A few seconds later, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Mom. He answered. What? Even though I couldn't hear her side of the conversation, I could tell she was yelling. Dad waited until she finally stopped. Then he spoke calmly. You went to his apartment? Another pause. You asked him to confess? Longer pause. You threw things? His jaw tightened. Then came the sentence that completely changed our family. No. I've made my decision. Silence. You have two choices. Marriage counseling, or I file for divorce. Even from where I was standing, I could hear Mom shouting through the speaker. Dad calmly held the phone away from his ear, waited, then put it back. No. This isn't because of yesterday. This is because of 22 years. Another long silence. Finally, he ended the call. Neither of us said anything for a while. Eventually, he sat down across from me. I should have protected you better. Dad, I mean it. I kept thinking things would improve. They didn't. They got worse. I quietly asked, what happens now? He leaned back. Your sister is going to court. And your mother, he paused, is going to have to decide whether she wants to save her marriage. Over the next several weeks, our family completely fell apart. The investigation officially cleared me. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. My apartment security footage, traffic cameras, my work schedule, my bank statements, the messages on my phone, my sister's own social media posts, and finally, the truth about the liquor. Dad's locked liquor cabinet had been forced open. Several expensive bottles were missing. My sister had stolen every one of them. There was no denying it anymore. Even after all that, she still refused to apologize. Instead, she changed her story. Again. At first, she claimed I'd bought the alcohol. Then she claimed I'd given it to her from my apartment. Then she claimed she'd misunderstood what happened. Every version contradicted the previous one. The detectives finally confronted her with all the evidence. She had nowhere left to run. Eventually, she admitted she'd lied. Not because she suddenly found a conscience, because she'd run out of lies. I wish I could tell you hearing that confession made me feel better. It didn't. It actually made everything worse, because it proved something I'd secretly hoped wasn't true. She had knowingly tried to destroy my life, and if she'd succeeded, she would have lived with it. Meanwhile, my mother still couldn't accept reality. Instead of asking why her daughter had done something so cruel, she kept asking why everyone was being so hard on her. Dad finally lost his patience. He arranged family counseling, not because he thought it would magically fix us, but because he wanted everything said out loud. No more pretending, no more excuses, no more rewriting history. The first counseling session was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. The counselor began with a simple question. Why do you think your family is here today? Mom immediately answered, because we've all been through something traumatic. Dad shook his head. No. We're here because one person has been protected from consequences for years. Nobody spoke. Then the counselor turned toward me. What would you like your family to understand? I'd spent days thinking about that question. Instead of giving a speech, I reached into my backpack and placed a notebook on the table. Dad looked surprised. So did Mom. So did my sister. I'd spent almost an entire night writing, every lie I could remember, every time I'd been blamed for something I hadn't done, every time my sister manipulated someone, every time Mom defended her. There were pages and pages. Not opinions, not feelings. Facts, dates, examples, events. I slowly opened the notebook. Then I started reading. The room became quieter with every page. When I finished the first 10 examples, Mom tried interrupting. The counselor gently stopped her. When I reached 20, my sister stopped making eye contact. By 30, she crossed her arms and stared at the floor. Dad didn't say a single word. He simply listened, exactly like he'd listened at the police station. Only this time, everyone else had to listen too. And for the first time in our lives, nobody could pretend the favoritism had never existed. I flipped to the next page. My 8th birthday. Mom smiled weakly. She already knew where this was going. My sister broke Dad's antique watch while we were playing in his office. I looked directly at my mother. Who got grounded? Nobody answered. I did. The counselor looked up from her notes. Was that true? Dad answered before anyone else could. Yes. I turned another page. When I was 14, someone backed Dad's truck into the mailbox. Again, I looked at Mom. You blamed me. She slowly nodded. But it wasn't you? No. It was my sister. Dad quietly added, she admitted it to me 6 months later. I kept reading, one memory after another. A broken laptop, money missing from Mom's purse, a school suspension, a fake story about me stealing her allowance. Every single incident followed the exact same pattern. My sister lied, Mom believed her, I paid the price. At first, my sister kept rolling her eyes. Then she started sighing dramatically. Eventually, she couldn't hide behind sarcasm anymore. The counselor finally turned toward her. Is any of this inaccurate? For the first time that entire session, my sister didn't have an answer. She just stared at the carpet. The silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Then the counselor asked the question none of us expected. Why? My sister looked up. What? Why did you keep lying? She shrugged. I don't know. No, the counselor leaned forward. I don't think that's true. Another long silence. Finally, she muttered something so quietly we almost missed it. Because it worked. The room froze. Not one person spoke. She realized what she'd admitted only after the words had already left her mouth. It worked. 4 simple words. They explained my entire childhood. She lied because she could. Because someone always believed her. Because there were never real consequences. Mom suddenly started crying. Not polite tears. Not the kind people wipe away while pretending they're fine. These were the tears of someone realizing she'd spent years helping create the very problem she could no longer control. I thought, she struggled to speak, I thought I was protecting her. Dad looked at her with an expression I'd never seen before. No, you were protecting yourself. She frowned. What? You couldn't accept that your favorite child wasn't perfect. The counselor slowly nodded. That's a common family dynamic. Mom buried her face in her hands. I failed both of my children. Nobody argued, because for the first time, she'd said something that was completely true. A few months later, the criminal case finally reached court. I wasn't nervous anymore. Not because I trusted the system, because the evidence was overwhelming. My sister entered the courtroom looking annoyed rather than frightened, as if the entire situation were an inconvenience she'd somehow been forced into. She barely looked at me. When she did, there wasn't guilt, there wasn't shame, only resentment. Like this entire mess was somehow my fault. The prosecutor laid everything out: the party, the stolen liquor, the false statements, the attempted cover-up, the evidence from the cameras, the phone records, the bank statements. Each piece chipped away at the fantasy she'd built. Her attorney tried to soften the damage. He argued she was young, immature, scared. He emphasized that the alcohol had already been in the house rather than purchased that day. He pointed to her clean record. He asked the judge for mercy. Then my mother stood. I'd hoped, after counseling, after everything, she might finally put the truth first. Instead, she looked at the judge with tears in her eyes. Please, my daughter made a terrible mistake. She's not a criminal. This shouldn't define the rest of her life. I watched the judge carefully. His face never changed. He listened. Then he quietly replied, "Ma'am, your daughter didn't simply break the law. She attempted to place that crime on someone else." His eyes briefly met mine. If that false accusation had succeeded, an innocent man would have carried the consequences. The courtroom became completely silent. Even my sister looked uncomfortable. For the first time, I wondered if reality was finally catching up with her. After a short recess, the plea agreement was accepted. She avoided jail, but she didn't walk away untouched. She received probation, a substantial financial penalty, mandatory counseling, and a permanent reminder that actions have consequences. As we walked out of the courthouse, Mom hurried to catch up with my sister. She wrapped her arms around her. "It's over. We'll get through this." My sister never hugged her back. Instead, she looked straight at me and whispered just loudly enough for me to hear, "You ruined my life." I stopped walking. For a moment, I almost answered. I almost reminded her who'd made the phone call, who'd lied, who'd watched police drag her own brother away in handcuffs. But then I realized something. Nothing I said would matter, because people like my sister don't rewrite history for others. They rewrite it for themselves. And in her version, she would always be the victim, no matter how many lives she destroyed. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that once the court case was over, everyone accepted what had happened, learned from it, and moved on. Real life doesn't work that way. If anything, the courtroom was only the end of one chapter. The real consequences didn't begin until afterward. My sister packed up her life and left. She finished college. Dad, despite everything, still honored his promise to pay for her education. A lot of people asked him why. Even I did. One evening, while we were closing one of his businesses, I finally couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dad?" He looked up from a stack of invoices. "Yeah? Why did you still pay for her college?" He sighed without looking at me. "Because my promise wasn't conditional." "But she tried to send me to prison." "I know." "Then why?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because if I broke every promise every time someone disappointed me, I'd become someone I don't want to be." I sat there quietly. He continued. "Helping her get an education didn't mean I approved of what she did. It meant I refused to let her bad decisions change my character." That conversation stayed with me for years. It also taught me something about my father. He wasn't weak. He simply refused to let bitterness make decisions for him. Unfortunately, my sister interpreted his kindness very differently. She saw it as proof she'd eventually get everything back. She moved to Los Angeles after graduation. Thanks to one of Dad's longtime business contacts, she landed a well-paying office job almost immediately. Dad never bragged about helping. In fact, he never even told her. He simply made one phone call, asked an old friend to give her an interview, and stepped back. She got the position. Instead of feeling grateful, she convinced herself she'd earned every bit of it alone. Months turned into years. She almost never called, never visited for holidays, skipped birthdays, ignored Mom on Mother's Day, didn't even answer when Dad called to check on her. The strange part? Mom still defended her, at least for a while. "She's busy. She's building her career. She's probably overwhelmed." Excuse after excuse, until eventually, even Mom ran out of excuses. One Christmas, we set an extra plate at the table. Mom insisted. "Maybe she'll surprise us." Dad didn't say anything. He simply nodded. We waited. Dinner got cold. The phone never rang. Around 9 that night, Mom quietly carried the untouched plate back into the kitchen. She didn't cry. She just stood there staring out the window. That's when I realized something. For the first time, she was experiencing exactly what I'd experienced my entire childhood, loving someone who kept choosing to hurt her. It didn't make me happy. If anything, it made me sad, because despite everything, she was still my mother. About 6 years passed. Life became surprisingly peaceful. Dad and I grew closer than ever. We worked together, had lunch every Friday, argued about baseball, talked about business. Sometimes we'd spend hours fixing things around the house, just because neither of us liked sitting still. Mom changed too. Slowly. Very slowly. Therapy seemed to help. Not overnight, not perfectly, but enough. She apologized more than once. Not the forced apology she'd given me after counseling. A real one. One evening, she sat across from me at the dining room table. No tears, no excuses, just honesty. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I stayed quiet. "But I need you to know I failed you." She swallowed hard. "I kept thinking I was protecting your sister, but all I really did was teach her she never had to face consequences." She looked down at her hands. "And I taught you that the truth didn't matter." Those words hurt, not because they were cruel, because they were true. For the first time in years, I believed she finally understood. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers. "I'm willing to try." She looked up. "What do you mean?" "I can't erase what happened. I don't think either of us can. But maybe we can stop letting it control the rest of our lives." She smiled through tears. It was probably the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. I thought, maybe, just maybe, our family was finally healing. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because just when life finally felt normal again, the front door rang one rainy Saturday afternoon. Dad opened it, then froze. Standing on the porch was my sister. She was smiling, holding a suitcase in one hand, a positive pregnancy test in the other. And behind her stood a man none of us had ever met. She looked straight at Dad, then at Mom, and said the words that instantly made every alarm bell go off in my head. "I want us to be a family again." I looked into her eyes. The smile was there, but something else was there too. The same look I'd seen years earlier, right before she blamed me for a crime I didn't commit. I leaned toward Dad and quietly whispered, "Don't trust her." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because judging by the expression on his face, he'd already reached exactly the same conclusion. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Dad stood there with one hand still resting on the doorknob. Mom covered her mouth. My sister smiled as if nothing had ever happened, as if 6 years of silence, years of broken trust, years of pain, could somehow disappear with a single visit. The man standing beside her awkwardly shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. He forced a smile. "Hi, I'm Ethan." Dad politely shook his hand. "Come in." As they stepped inside, my sister carefully placed the pregnancy test on the kitchen counter. "I wanted you both to hear it from me." Mom's eyes immediately filled with tears. "You're pregnant?" My sister smiled wider. "About 8 weeks." Mom hugged her instantly. Dad didn't. He simply stood there watching, studying every expression, every movement. After everything we'd been through, he no longer believed words. He believed patterns. We all sat down in the living room. For a while, the conversation stayed surprisingly normal. Morning sickness, doctor appointments, baby names, work. The boyfriend mostly stayed quiet. Whenever my sister spoke, he looked at her before answering anything, like he was waiting for permission. That caught my attention. About an hour later, Dad cleared his throat. "I think it's time we talked." The room instantly became quiet. My sister's smile faded. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you really want to be part of this family again, we need honesty." She nodded immediately. "Of course." Dad leaned forward. "I'll support my grandchild. I'll help however I can. You'll never have to question that." For just a second, hope appeared on my sister's face. Then Dad continued, "But helping a child and trusting you are two different things." Her smile disappeared. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying trust has to be earned. You don't get it back because you showed up pregnant." Nobody spoke. Dad wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. That somehow made every word heavier. "I have 3 conditions." She crossed her arms. "What conditions?" "First, you begin individual therapy again." She looked annoyed. "Second, we attend family counseling." She sighed loudly. "And third, you apologize to your brother." Silence. A long, heavy silence. My sister slowly turned toward me. There wasn't warmth in her eyes. There wasn't regret. only calculation. She was deciding whether pretending was worth whatever she thought she'd gain. Finally, she smiled. Of course. I'd love to apologize. Something about the way she said it made every instinct in my body scream. She doesn't mean a word of it. The next afternoon, she called me. So, when do you want to meet? I thought about it for a second. Somewhere public. Fine. We agreed on a small family restaurant halfway across town. Dad insisted we meet alone. If she's sincere, she shouldn't need an audience. When I arrived, she was already sitting there. The boyfriend sat beside her. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He politely stood to shake my hand. She didn't. She barely looked at me. A waitress brought water. Nobody touched it. Finally, she folded her hands. I've been thinking a lot. I simply nodded. And, I'm sorry. She stopped. That was it. Just, I'm sorry. I waited. She frowned. What? That's your apology? I said I'm sorry. For what? She looked irritated. You know. No, I don't. Another pause. She let out an exaggerated sigh. I'm sorry things happened the way they did. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I'd heard this kind of apology before. One that sounded like accountability without actually accepting any responsibility. I calmly asked, what exactly are you apologizing for? She looked at the table, then finally answered, for accusing you. Why did you accuse me? I panicked. No. You made several statements. You repeated them. You doubled down. You watched me get arrested. Why? Her jaw tightened. The boyfriend quietly whispered, just tell him the truth. She shot him a look so cold, he immediately looked away. Then she turned back to me. You really want the truth? Yes. She leaned across the table. This never would have happened if you'd just bought the alcohol. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd heard her correctly. What? You heard me. If you'd helped your sister, none of this would have happened. I stared at her, completely speechless. She actually believed it. Even after 6 years, after counseling, after court, after destroying our family, she still thought I was the problem. Not her lies, not the false accusation, not the attempted felony. Me. Her boyfriend slowly closed his eyes, almost like he'd finally understood who he was dating. I stood up. I think we're done here. She looked surprised. That's it? I nodded. That wasn't an apology. It was another attempt to blame me for your choices. I placed a few bills on the table for my drink, then looked at her one last time. You still haven't changed. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard her shouting my name. I never looked back. I had no idea. The restaurant owner had just captured our entire conversation on the security system, audio included. And that recording would become the final piece of proof my parents needed. The drive home was quiet. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, not because I doubted myself, because I couldn't believe someone could spend 6 years pretending to grow, only to reveal they hadn't changed at all. When I pulled into my driveway, Dad was already waiting outside. He looked at my face. He didn't ask whether the apology had gone well. He already knew. She blamed you again. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She said if I'd just bought the alcohol, none of it would have happened. Dad slowly closed his eyes. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly muttered, God help that child. The baby? He nodded. If your sister doesn't change, that little boy or girl is going to grow up exactly the way you did. Those words stayed with me, because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about my sister anymore. I was thinking about an innocent child who hadn't even been born yet, someone who would never get to choose their parents. The next morning, Mom called. She sounded hopeful. So, how did it go? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked, did she tell you what happened? No. She said she wanted you to explain. I took a deep breath. It wasn't an apology. What do you mean? She blamed me. Silence. No, she wouldn't. I wish you were right, Mom sounded confused. There has to be some misunderstanding. Before I could answer, Dad gently took the phone from my hand. I'll handle this. He put the call on speaker. Honey, there isn't a misunderstanding. She said exactly what he told you. Mom refused to believe it. No. I'm talking to her. An hour later, my sister arrived back at the house. Dad asked everyone to sit in the living room. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. He simply looked at my sister. Tell your mother what happened. She smiled confidently. I apologized. Dad nodded. And then? She shrugged. He got dramatic. I never blamed him. Dad calmly stood up. Without saying another word, he picked up his keys. I'll be back. She frowned. Where are you going? He smiled. To verify something. About 45 minutes later, Dad returned carrying a small flash drive. My sister's smile disappeared. What is that? The restaurant owner is an old friend. He also has security cameras. She immediately interrupted. So? They record audio. The room became absolutely silent. I watched every bit of color disappear from her face. Dad plugged the drive into the television. A video appeared. There we were, sitting across from each other. The audio was crystal clear. Every word, every pause, every lie. The room listened in complete silence. Then the sentence played. This never would have happened if you just bought the alcohol. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The recording continued. You still haven't changed. Then it ended. The television went black. Dad slowly turned toward my sister. I gave you one opportunity. One. You couldn't even fake honesty for 10 minutes. Mom looked completely devastated. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She just looked defeated, like years of denial had finally collapsed all at once. My sister folded her arms. So what? So what? Dad repeated. You lied. Again. You manipulated us. Again. You tried to blame your brother. Again. And now you expect us to pretend none of this happened because you're pregnant? My sister suddenly exploded. You always choose him. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I'd waited my entire life to hear those words. Dad looked genuinely shocked. I choose the truth. You call that choosing him? She pointed directly at me. He ruined everything. No. Dad's voice was calm. You did. You ruined your own life the day you decided your brother was disposable. She looked toward Mom. Surely, Mom would save her. Mom always had. Instead, Mom quietly whispered, Your father is right. Those 5 words hit harder than anything else that day. My sister stared at her in disbelief. What? I can't keep doing this. Mom's voice trembled. I spent years protecting you. I hurt your brother. I almost destroyed my marriage. And for what? So you could keep lying? My sister looked around the room as if she'd suddenly become the victim. This is unbelievable. No, Dad answered. What's unbelievable is how many chances you've already had. He walked over to the hallway closet, opened it, pulled out her suitcase, placed it beside the front door. You can stay in a hotel tonight. I'll make sure your medical expenses are covered. I'll help my grandchild however I can. But until you decide to take responsibility for your own life, you are no longer welcome in this house. For the first time, she looked scared. Not because she felt guilty, because she realized the safety net was finally gone. She looked at Mom one last time. You're really choosing him? Mom slowly shook her head. No. I'm choosing the child I should have protected years ago. Those words filled the room with complete silence. My sister grabbed her suitcase. Without another word, she slammed the front door behind her. None of us chased after her. Deep down, we all knew. If she had stayed another hour, nothing would have changed. Because the hardest person to save is someone who believes they've never done anything wrong. 3 days later, Mom called me. Her voice sounded different. Not panicked, not emotional, just tired. She's gone. I know. No. I mean, she's really gone. I frowned. What happened? She packed everything. She drove back to Los Angeles. She didn't even say goodbye. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Mom whispered, "I think I've finally lost her." I looked out the window. Part of me wanted to comfort her. Another part remembered every time I'd needed comforting and never received it. "I'm sorry," she quietly cried. "I spent years believing I was protecting her. But I never realized I was teaching her she'd never have consequences." There wasn't anything left to say. Sometimes people learn the truth only after it's already cost them everything. The months passed. Occasionally, we'd receive updates, mostly short text messages, doctor appointments, ultrasounds, pictures of the baby's nursery. She never apologized, not once. She acted as if nothing had happened. Then one evening, Dad received a phone call. He answered, listened, said almost nothing. When he hung up, he rubbed his forehead. "That was your sister." "What happened?" "Her boyfriend left." Mom looked up immediately. "What?" "He packed his things and moved out." "Why?" Dad gave a sad smile. He said he couldn't keep living with someone who blamed everyone else for every problem. Nobody spoke, because we'd all heard that sentence before, just from different people. A week later, my sister called Mom herself. She was crying, not because she'd lost the relationship, because she was alone. She wanted to come back. She wanted to move home. She wanted another chance. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at me. Nobody answered right away. Finally, Dad took the phone. "I'll always be your father. I'll always help my grandchild. If the baby needs medical care, I'll pay for it. If your child needs college someday, I'll help. But you," he paused, "you need to build your own life. You can't keep coming home every time the consequences catch up with you." She started crying harder. "So you're abandoning me?" "No, I'm refusing to enable you." There was a long silence. Then she quietly asked, "So that's it?" Dad closed his eyes. "I hope one day you'll prove me wrong. I hope one day you'll truly change. But I can't keep pretending you've already changed when you haven't." He ended the call. That was the last meaningful conversation any of us had with her. Life slowly settled into something that finally resembled peace. Dad officially updated his will. He told both Mom and me about it one afternoon. "I'm leaving almost everything to you." I immediately shook my head. "Dad, I don't care about the money." "I know. That's exactly why," he smiled. "Your sister will receive a small, fixed amount, enough that she can't successfully contest the will. The rest goes to you." I didn't feel victorious. If anything, I felt sad, because inheritances aren't really about money. They're reminders that one day, someone you love won't be here anymore. I would have traded every dollar just to have a normal family, one where my sister never lied, one where my mother believed both of her children equally, one where Dad never had to choose between his wife and his son. But life doesn't give us alternate endings, only the one we earn. It's been years now. People sometimes ask me if I hate my sister. The answer surprises them. No, I don't. Hatred takes energy, and after everything that happened, I decided she wasn't worth giving any more of mine. Do I trust her? Never. Do I forgive her? Maybe someday. Forgiveness isn't something you give another person. It's something you eventually give yourself, so you can stop carrying the weight they left behind. As for my mother, we're closer now than we've ever been, not because the past disappeared, but because she finally stopped pretending it never happened. Sometimes, that's the best healing anyone can hope for. If there's one lesson I learned from everything, it's this: the people who constantly avoid consequences eventually become prisoners of their own choices, and the people who keep rescuing them often become their first victims. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. If you were in my position, would you have forgiven your sister after everything she did? Or would you have walked away for good? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy true family stories like this, stories about betrayal, difficult choices, and the moments that change people's lives forever, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories to come, and trust me, some of them are even harder to believe than mine. One thing this experience taught me is that families don't usually fall apart overnight. They fall apart one excuse at a time. One lie that goes unchallenged. One consequence that never comes. One child who keeps getting rescued, and another who keeps getting sacrificed. For years, I believed my sister had ruined my life. Now I realize something different. She didn't ruin it. She forced me to stop chasing the approval of people who had already decided not to see me. That was painful, but it was also freeing. Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is walk away from people you still love. Not because you stopped caring, but because they never stopped hurting you. If you're listening to this and you've ever been the family scapegoat, I hope you remember this. Being blamed doesn't make you guilty. Being ignored doesn't make you unworthy. And protecting your own peace doesn't make you selfish. Sometimes it's the healthiest decision you'll ever make. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. I read every single one, and you never know, your story might help someone else who's going through the same thing. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next story.